Hi everyone, I'm Greg Mustreader, and today I'm glad to present to you the guest of my podcast, Kostya Kavutskiy, international master, celebrated coach, chess writer, and sensei at the chessdojo chess training program. Hi, Kostya.
Hello, Greg. Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Yeah, it's an honor to see you here. I've read and seen a lot of your content, and I'm sure that we will discuss many interesting and useful insights for chess improvement at all stages. But first of all, I want to speak about yours, because I know that you are on your journey to the Grandmaster title, that you have repeatedly said this is your goal. How's it going with that, and at what stage are you currently?
Oh, that's a great question to start with. Yeah, because this is the question I probably get the most these days from people that both know me and don't know me. They're all curious. I mean, basically, I've been hunting for the GM title for a while. I'm not very close. Like rating-wise, I'm very far away, and I have no norms. You know, I've been close maybe in a couple tournaments, but not too many. And so right now, I'm just still very far away from being, let's say, at GM level. So the way I kind of look at it is I have to improve my chess a lot to get there. But of course, part of that is still playing a lot of like norm events, norm tournaments, getting experience, looking for chances. So yeah, it's not like every single tournament I play, I'm like, oh, I'm going to get the norm this time, 100% sure. It's more like, all right, let's go play some games, try to get some good games and learn from the games. But basically that's my main goal. Like that's ultimately what I'm working towards. It's, to me, feels like it's fairly far away, but it's a big goal in my sights.
So fairly far away. Do you have like some forecasts, some timelines, maybe optimistic, pessimistic scenarios when you could reach that goal?
Well, the pessimistic scenario, I would say, is the easy one. It's just that I just don't get there. That's the pessimistic scenario. Optimistically, I mean, it's hard to even put a number on it. But I would think like if I put my head down and focused on the goal, maybe like 2-3 years is what I feel like would be the fastest that I could reasonably see it happening. But even that seems optimistic.
Okay. That's very interesting for me also, because I'm struggling with a different but a bit similar problem, although my challenge is not as difficult as yours, because I want to get to the FIDE master title, and I've recently discussed with my coach, and he said he's absolutely sure I can do this, maybe in a couple of years, but still I'm not absolutely sure I can do this. I hope we'll discuss this also with you today. But first of all, I'm really interested in the way people think about being an international master, being a grandmaster. People speak about differences in the level, in the understanding of the game. In your opinion, what's the secret sauce that makes a person a grandmaster? What's this difference? For example, you are a 2400 rated international master. You haven't yet gotten the norms. What will Kostya Kavutskiy look like, the one who already did this and the one who is the grandmaster? What will the difference between those two Kostyas be?
Yeah, no, it's another really interesting question. I've definitely thought about this because it's a way to like envision like how you can make progress and how you can see like the strongest version of yourself. I imagine the 2500 rated version of myself is a much better endgame player, much better prepared in the openings, and calculates a lot cleaner, faster, deeper, and more efficiently. So it's really a lot of stuff that I feel like I could work on. In general, I think there's many things that make a grandmaster, and I'm probably not the best person to ask this, not being one, not having coached, many GMs or anything like that. But in general, it seems like they're universal players. They don't have like huge weaknesses in any part of the game. And in particular, they are, in my opinion, very like practical and resourceful and very big fighters. Like it's much harder to defeat a GM for whatever reason than it is to defeat like an IM or an FM. And I don't know if it's a psychological thing or they just defend better, or, whatever it is, it just always feels much tougher against them in all aspects of the game. So a long way to say that, they're simply stronger in all facets of chess, but like you really feel it when you play them. Like they're very careful, even when they're completely winning, they're still like very careful and still trying to outthink you and not take it easy. And you just see it's like, wow, they work harder basically than other players. And I'm not sure if that's because they're grandmasters or that's why they became grandmasters.
Well, that's a great answer. You mentioned three directions of improvement for yourself: calculation, Endgames, and the third one was being better at openings.
With the openings,
right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, do you consider those your three weaknesses? If we speak about weaknesses and grandmaster not having any.
I would say if I had to pick three for myself, yeah, those would be like the big three that I think. I'm sure there's more, but those are three pretty big ones. I mean, calculation, especially, I think there's so much room to improve there. And I feel like it has a great impact on your chess.
What about the positional understanding? Many people speak about grandmasters having this great positional understanding, knowing where to put the piece, which square, how to change or not change the pawn structure. You feel like you are better at this than at calculation, or how do you assess this?
When it comes to positional understanding, I feel like that's the one thing that maybe isn't so obviously terrible about my chess, or at least that's not so apparent when I'm analyzing my games. So like the engine will, of course, point out all the mistakes I'm making in calculation, and those will be very obvious when I run my games through the engine afterwards. But positional stuff, I think that might be a little bit more subtle. You kind of have to work for that in many cases to figure out where you're making positional mistakes. So maybe I'm off on that, but that kind of feels like where, yeah, maybe that's not a weakness of my game. Another thing I was thinking about is like nowadays in tournaments, a lot of games end up being decided in time trouble, maybe mutual time trouble. Yeah. We're playing on this 30-second increment a lot of the times. And I've had many games that like go into end game, late middle game. It's just very complicated, and it just ends up being whoever can calculate a little bit better or blunder a little bit less later on. Yeah, it seems like a lot of the games is being decided with just like pure calculation, maybe even end game knowledge. So that's kind of where I'm currently kind of thinking about it all.
Okay, so the next logical question would be how you work on those aspects. I know that you yourself are a participant at the chessdojo's program. You mentioned it in your interviews that you have also program for 2,400 plus rated players, which is very exciting. Can you talk about the program you are currently undergoing? What exactly do you do in all the three aspects, maybe some other aspects that we have discussed?
Yeah, absolutely. So basically, the three of us, myself, Grandmaster Jesse Cry, International Master David Pruis, over at chessdojo, we launched this training program actually almost exactly 2 years ago now. And the idea was very simple. It's just to give as many people a chance as possible, like a simple program to improve their chess, just listing out things every level needs to do every 100 points. So from 0 to 300, and then 3 to 4, 4 to 500, 5 to 600, and so on, just all the way up. And so we have a bunch of books that we suggest that people should read. We suggest a bunch of endgames that they should learn at different levels. And then we have other tasks. One of the biggest tasks, of course, is just playing classical games. We believe in like playing long time control games and then analyzing those games without the computer, with your own thoughts, with your own analysis, and then publishing the analysis for the rest of the people in your group and others to see and look at and then comment. So it's like the program is not just let's say a list of recommendations, but also the social aspect, because we believe like training with another person is actually one of the most valuable things you can do when it comes to chess improvement. which goes to all of our careers. Like thinking back when we were all getting better, it was like when we were working with someone else consistently, sometimes like every day, training with a partner, like hours on end, sparring with them, playing positions against them, analyzing stuff with them. That's always felt like the most useful. So we try to like infuse that into the program itself. So by doing this, we also kind of try to list out the things that we would need to do to try and get to 2,500. We were all 2,400 at the time, and now we're all kind of trying to get back to 2,400. I would say the main struggle for me is, balancing the business work, like the dojo work, with my chess work. Like when I'm running the site, I'm not exactly solving problems or working on my openings or looking at Endgames or anything like that. So I would say that's for me the biggest struggle. It's also like almost like a motivational thing, because when I wake up in the morning, the first thing I can do can be working on my chess, or it can be working on the site, looking at students' games and things like that. And so for me, I find that I can only truly focus on one thing at a time. Like one thing is my main focus, my main intensity, and then everything else is kind of secondary to that. Now, when it comes to improving my own chess, we have the same program as everyone else. We have a bunch of books that we have to read that we chose. Some Kasparov, some Dvoretsky, some Agard, some tough stuff. Then we have some positions, we call them sparring positions, that are just useful positions to play against a training partner, like typical end games, typical middle games, things like this. And then, of course, playing a bunch of classical games and then analyzing them. That's a huge part of the process as well. So I've got a ton of work to do in all these regards.
I can really relate when you speak about it being difficult to juggle your chess improvement and your business, your project. I have the same story with my businesses and my YouTube and podcasts. So yeah, I feel it. So you play some sparring games as well. Against whom? Against your co-founders?
Yeah, a lot of times against Jesse and David. If not them, I'll try to find someone else around my level to play against, either over the board or online.
What's the time control for those games?
It really depends.
Like
for the end games, we'll typically do short time controls, like, because when you get to the end game, normally you'll be in time pressure. So we'll do something like 5 minutes per side with a 30-second increment, or even 1 minute per side with 30 seconds, and you just start in some deep end game position. For the opening, sometimes we'll spar opening positions, right? Just trying to play some topical lines. And those will usually play either blitz or rapid, something like 10+2, 5+2. And what we do for opening, actually sparring, is we don't finish the game. We just play the first 25 moves, and then we just stop and like just discuss and analyze, and because then it just becomes a blitz game. It's not exactly training at that point.
Yeah.
But yeah, we find like the collaboration, I mean, that's really such a useful part for many people when they're trying to get better.
That's funny. I remember some chess players, probably Levy, said that it's a pity sometimes that chess game, you have to play it till the end. You cannot just stop after like 90 minutes, like in soccer, and say, I scored 2, you scored 1, I win. So that's what you do when you stop the game. Like, your opening sucked, I have a better position, let's stop.
Yeah, exactly.
And also, do you play like training games? For example, that's what I currently started doing, and I really feel it helps me. I found a sparring partner who also lives in Almaty, Kazakhstan, where I live. And we get together once a week, and we play an OTB sparring game. We don't play 90 minutes per game because it would be too long, but we play like 35 minutes plus 30 seconds edit after each move. By the way, guys, you can check out the recaps of those games on this channel. So I think you also have in the program something like that. So like not just sparring openings and end games, but proper training games, if I may call them proper.
Yeah, actually, I would say we definitely suggest playing like online classical games. And a lot of the members in our program, they have OTB ratings. They have like a FIDE rating or USCF or English rating or something like that. And then, of course, they have their online ratings, their chess.com and their Lichess. And for them, their online ratings are basically like their training accounts. So they'll just play like online games, and it doesn't affect their OTB rating, but they're very serious games between two players, usually around equal rating. Then they'll have like a postmortem, Skype with each other. And it's very different, than just, let's say, logging into chess.com, Lichess, and just clicking 60 plus 30 or just whatever game you're going to get doing that. So yeah, we definitely encourage folks to kind of like pair up and try to play against each other, like once a week, like you're doing. I think that's great.
Yeah, that's at least between the tournaments. I feel that this helps me practice more. Okay, another question is I heard that you say that you encourage your students to conduct analysis without the computer after having played the game. I think this is something that not many people do currently, because the temptation is so strong. I think even Fabiano told this on his C-Squared podcast, that after the game he looks at the computer lines. And Abhimanyu Mishra, who spoke with him on the podcast, told him that he does it like the correct way, like you discussed. So without the computer. Do you really feel that this is an important step in becoming a better chess player?
It makes a lot of sense, and I'll try to get into why. But it's funny what you said about Caruana, because I think virtually every top player that I've seen, and like living in St. Louis, sometimes I'm working the event, so I'll see a lot of these guys, like a U.S. Championship, Sinkfield Cup, American Cup, and so on. Basically, everyone checks the computer immediately after the game. Very few players don't. Mishra, I think, is like a rare exception, but clearly he's like super motivated and he's on his way up. I think the reason they do it often is because they're going to get interviewed about the game and they want to have at least some knowledge going in, but also they're just very, very curious. And actually, I would say most of the, let's say, title players I know, like IMs and GMs, like people I've roomed with and stuff, from what I see, they usually just check the game immediately and they're like, oh, I missed this. Yeah. And I think the reason they do that is because they're checking their analysis of the game, their variations, and the things they saw, the things they calculated, the things they evaluated. They're just immediately trying to get that into the PGN, and then they immediately want feedback on it. So they're kind of skipping the step where you take a look at the second day and you try to see like, okay, did I miss something here? And you try to figure it out yourself. So they're skipping out that step and they're just trying to get to the answer quickly. So intuitively, it's hard to say. It does feel like maybe everyone would be better off if they just tried to do that hand analysis themselves. One thing to keep in mind, of course, is that when you're playing a tournament, if your games are being broadcast live, which for me they often are, for top players they often are, if you don't check the opening, then your opponents are, they might repeat a line against you, and then you're kind of caught in a tough spot there if you don't at least check, like, look for improvements, because someone might repeat the same line and then you're caught unprepared, especially if you're playing the same repertoire, Petrov, whatever it is. Then you kind of look silly if you don't at least check the opening in your games. I'm not sure exactly what the best middle ground is, but for most players out there, like club players, I think you're still trying to very much develop your analytical skills. And I think a big part of that is just reviewing your games, and it doesn't just have to be reviewing your games. I mean, another classic exercise is just taking a master level game, looking at it without the computer, trying to analyze it, trying to understand what happened in the game, trying to come up with variations, alternate moves, how they would have been dealt with, trying to figure out what were the main mistakes in the game, and then checking your notes against the conclusion or against the engine, or if the game is annotated. I think that's a great exercise also that really helps develop your ability to just analyze a position, which is not exactly the most exciting part of chess training, but I think it is very, very fundamental and likely something that everyone does at some point on their way up.
Yeah, I already thought about me having to be more patient after the game and not immediately type in the moves into the engine to check everything. But the temptation is very strong, so I'll have to think about it. Let's discuss a little bit more the exact day in life of a chess improver like yourself. If we consider that you spend part of your day, obviously, on chessdojo, on communication with the students, on running the project, on sometimes streaming, stuff like that, recording podcasts. But if we consider that you spent some time in the day, I don't know how many hours, so that's another question. Some part of the day you spent training your chess. You mentioned several aspects that you train. How do you, what percentage is one, what percentage is the other? How do you structure all this? Because it's a challenge for me as well. I solve puzzles, I play training games, I sometimes study some endgames, but I often do this take this decision what to do intuitively, and maybe there's a better system.
I had different periods in my life when I'm working on chess more or less. I'd say, the most I've done is, basically where chess is just kind of my life all day. And I'm probably getting 4 or 5, 6 hours of training in. And then outside of that training, I'm either giving lessons or playing Blitz or watching chess, so it's just chess the whole day. These days, when a lot of my time goes to the site and streaming and stuff like that, which I wouldn't consider any kind of serious chess work, I'd say I try to spend a little bit of time every day doing something, especially something like OTB, at least playing through a game or 2 games just to get some movement with the pieces. But yeah, I'll look for maybe something between one hour, at least of chess, some kind of chess work every day. Maybe it's just analyzing some of my older games. And then maximum I'll get is maybe 3 hours, 4 hours on the best day these days. But usually it's going to be 2 or 3, I would say. How I divide that time. So what I've typically suggested, and I think what's worked for me in the past, is to just choose basically one thing that's your main focus. It's one book that you're working through. And if it's a puzzle book, then doing something a couple pages of that book every day until you finish it or you get through most of it. Or if it's a game collection, then just playing through 2-3 games once per day, every day for a month or so on. I find it's a very simple way to get stuff done. It's you just take one thing, one book you want to read. You do that's the first thing you do when you're training. So 45 minutes to an hour, whatever it might be, solving or playing through games. And then after that, you're kind of free to do whatever you want. If you want to spar some endgames, you want to look at an opening, then whatever you want to do, you've kind of. That way, you're going to get something done at the end of the month. And of course, it's all useful, whether you're working on your calculation, whether you're playing through someone's games, whether you're looking at a positional book, it's all useful in the end. But yeah, for me, it's never really worked to bounce around too much, because then I feel like I don't really retain much of anything that way.
Which books are you working, or which book are you working on at the moment?
Okay, there is a couple. So I was solving a lot from Dvoretsky's Recognizing Your Opponent's Resources, which is a more recent book, but that one is a very good one. A lot of very tough puzzles in that. Lately, I've been playing through some games as well of Mikhail Tal, his book, just Life in Games, which I've just never read. So going through it now, better late than never. I've got a couple books, I'm kind of looking at a little bit, but I would say those are the 2 I've been spending the most time with.
It's a bit dangerous to study games of Tal. I've studied some games of his lately, and when I played against Kramnik, I sacrificed all my pieces. Even he was surprised at this lack of respect. Okay.
That's funny.
That's a great choice. And about Dvoretsky, I think this is an advanced book. I haven't read it, but it's about how to think about what your opponent can do, right? So it's not a standard way to solve some positions for yourself. It's the opposite, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's basically a puzzle book. So there's a lot of exercises, but in every exercise, you need to find some kind of idea for yourself. You need to find then what the opponent's defense is going to be. And then you need to figure out whether it's still worth it to go for this line. Maybe you have a counter resource, or whether it's not, and you just need to make like a normal move in the position. So it's like a very tough puzzle book because it's not like your classic combinations book where there's always like a clear, direct answer. Here, it's like there is kind of like a point to the problem that you're usually trying to find, but the point of the problem is usually some kind of opponent's response. For example, there might be a pawn hanging, and then you're trying to figure out if you can take this pawn or not. In some positions you can take the pawn, some positions you can't, and then you just got to figure it out. And so it's very, very challenging, but useful because actually for me, this has definitely been a big weakness of mine in the past, is just like missing the opponent's chances during my game. And definitely something like that, it's not easy to work on without kind of specific puzzles for this.
Yeah, interesting. I should check out this book. Let's talk endgames, because obviously you are a very powerful player, top, I don't know how many in the world, but still among the world's best chess players. IM title is very difficult to get. So you probably know most of the open end games, theoretical end games out there. So I was wondering which end games do you study? What is there left to study for you?
Oh man, no, I'm behind on my end games. I gotta say, there's plenty for me to learn. To put it in context, if you take, there's a well-known book, 100 Endgames You Must Know, by De Villa, and I was reading that one maybe a year or two ago, and I would say I knew some of it for sure. I knew a lot of it, but I didn't know all of it. That's for sure. So I knew, but I learned a great deal from that book, let's say, and so I still have a ton to learn. I would say maybe I've got a handle on 10-15% of Dvoretsky's Endgame Manual. If I'm not even sure, that might be ambitious. Because that's a very thick and deep book. But yeah, no, actually, one other book I've been studying recently is Van Perlo's Endgame Tactics, which is not really like a theoretical endgame book, which I think is kind of more what you were asking. That one is more just like a book of endgame calculation puzzles and interesting examples. Yeah, I think when it comes to theoretical endgames, I have a ton to learn still when it comes like the more, let's say the more obscure ones.
Such as, for example?
Yeah, like they're tricky rook endgames. For instance, like rook and two pawns against rook and one. I know I don't want to give too much away, but like rook and two against rook and one. There are cases where the defending king has to maybe stay on one side of the pawn or the other side of the pawn. And I think some grandmasters probably know these positions extremely well, and I certainly don't. I just kind of I know that they're usually drawn 2 versus 1, but there are definitely some like details in these positions. I would say like, I mean, there's lots of these like difficult rook endgame books, and like, yeah, sometimes you go through them and you you see how much you don't know, like how many nuances there are in these positions.
Even Magnus reads books on the rook endgames, as we've seen recently on his photo posted to his Instagram.
Yeah, that's right.
So yeah, even if he does that, then probably there is a lot to learn for everyone.
And he's he's a genius. So and even him, he's got a lot to look at.
He knows something about endgames. So let's talk about openings then, because this is a topic that really frightens many chess improvers, having to learn a lot of theory, and I mean a lot, especially at your level. People come prepared to the teeth, as they say. So armed with 25 move long lines, top stockfish recommendations. Modern theory is evolving constantly. You have to be on the lookout for some novelties and stuff like that. How do you navigate your openings? How do you improve them?
Yeah, that's a huge question, of course. I think one thing to distinguish is certainly that opening repertoires and knowledge, they kind of matter more at higher levels than they do at lower levels. And I think it's definitely something that players probably spend too much time on in general, even though at higher levels, it's probably the number one thing they spend time on. They're just studying openings like all the time. But I feel like for many players, like club players, and especially in lower, like, yeah, you're going to get more out of working on your calculation, working on your middle game understanding, your end games, like so much more, I think, bang for your buck going about it that way. Because when you study openings, people, they try to make this argument like, you're going to get an opening every game, so you should try to look at the opening so you start off, on the right foot. But what happens is you're going to leave the opening at some point, and then even with a nice position, you're then going to have to play some kind of middle game. And these days, like, openings are very solid, like through and through. So in the past, like, people would play like really dubious stuff. You get like a winning position out of the opening in many cases. Nowadays, like, your random Joe is still going to be playing like some solid Caro-Kann, French, like Sicilian. And like best you can hope for is like a good version of a normal Sicilian position or normal French position. And then you still have to be able to handle that position and play it properly. So it's like, that is the thing I think people should work on, is like really like their middle game skills, again, calculation, end game, and so on. Okay, that being said, once you get to a certain level, I would say, in my opinion, really around like starting around like 1900, 2000 FIDE, that's when openings do, I think, start to matter more. And then you can get a lot more improvement from focusing on your openings, because then you are going to be playing players that really know a lot. And the advice I always give is like, you shouldn't work on your openings unless it's like a problem, like you're getting in trouble in the opening and you're constantly like getting bad positions, or you're not getting an advantage with white, or you're struggling. Then it's like, okay, you definitely need to work on your openings, or if you're unhappy, otherwise, like, work on other stuff. But yeah, at this level, like 1900, 2000, I think that's when, you do have to kind of hunker down. You have to make sure you're playing positions like you enjoy and that suit you. You're not just playing like random lines because you learned them once and that's just what you play. But you have to like really like learn to like believe in your systems and your structures and your openings, and start to develop like a deeper, let's say, understanding for them. So, of course, the next big misconception I think people have is that they feel like learning openings is just like trying to memorize the moves. Like, in this position, you play this move, in this position, you play this move. And then it's just like, you just study that for like hours on end. And of course, there's like so much more to it than that. Like, usually when I'm looking at an opening, I'm like analyzing games, and I'm like trying to uncover like thematic ideas and trying to understand like, why does one move work in one position and not work in another position, and trying to like figure out like the nuances, like when should I play for this pawn break? When should I castle queenside? What pieces should I trade off? So it's like you're trying to develop a very deep understanding of the opening, and it's not just about like memorizing lines. Is, I think, like the last part. It's just like the very, like, once you know what you're doing in the opening, and then just like trying to remember specific little like tricks and traps. It's like, that's kind of, for me, I don't know, I think the last step of opening knowledge.
I think this matters, especially considering that you are a King's Indian player, and there it's impossible to memorize everything. I think it's like plans matter most, right?
No, true. I mean, it could just be my opening choices that feed this opinion. But yeah, I found like in the King's Indian, you could be extremely well prepared, but like it's very easy to mess it up. And yeah, sooner or later, you're just going to get a classic structure, and it's just going to be a matter of who knows the positions better. And I learned this, but even before I started playing this, I learned this as a D4 player against King's Indian players, getting crushed every game. Regardless of what would happen in the opening, I could be like extremely well prepared and get like a computer advantage, and still it's like, a couple moves, the game gets messy, and yeah, I think the experience starts to take over. Yeah, I feel like to me, that seems like that's always going to be more important for humans playing chess. It's just whoever has a better feeling for the middle games and the positions that they're getting into.
Okay, and at your level, probably you're already spent a significant portion of time reviewing your lines, right, or learning new openings. How do you approach this, by the way? Because some people, when they hit a certain level, they start thinking that they need new openings because, like, the IM level openings no longer work against GMs. I need to study some proper lines, some people say. So what's your approach here?
Yeah, for me, actually, it's really just all about the positions that I enjoy playing. There are certain positions that I find more interesting than others. I think it's pretty obvious. I play the King's Indian, I play the Sicilian as black. I'm not too difficult to figure out. Although with white, okay, I'm a D4 Knight of 3 player. So, I look for positions that are interesting to play, and when I switch an opening, it's because I'm unhappy with the positions that I'm getting out of it. Yeah, and that's generally what I recommend to people. I mean, chess is a game to be enjoyed ultimately, but obviously there's many different openings out there, and it's not like these are the only openings. I used to play the French. I used to play like E4, E5. So like sometimes you just change as a player, and your tastes adapt, and you just learn that you enjoy certain positions more than others. And also, I mean, it also has always made sense to me these days that, like, in this age where everything is equal, there's no advantage against any opening. Any opening can be prepared to equality. The only edge you can really get, since everyone's using the same engines, is to find some positions that maybe you connect with a little bit better than your opponent does. At least that's my thinking on it.
Yeah. I feel this. I think it's called the sunk cost fallacy effect. With regard to some openings I've studied, and I now feel that I'm not getting the positions that I want. So they are fine positions, but do not correspond to my style. For example, I've been playing the semi-Slav with black for a long time, but I'm more of an attacking player, and I decided I want to play the King's Indian, and I started looking at it, but it feels so sad that I have to give up all those lines, all those hours of work memorizing the previous opening. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, of course, I would say, like, you don't have to park the semi-Slav forever, and many players, they enjoy having let's say a choice of openings that you can play based on the opponent and their repertoire.
Yeah.
And many players that I see, like when I'm preparing these days, they seem to play multiple systems, which is definitely new. In the past, people would just play like one repertoire and that's it. Everyone was easy to prep for. So I would say you can always go back to the semi-Slav, especially, the King's Indian. It's, in my opinion, a great choice against like low rated players or people up to a certain level. Let's say like 23, 2400 is when it starts to get quite dangerous to play it every game. But yeah, and no, I mean, and of course, like, your knowledge of the semi-Slav, I think long-term it will help, like, even if you stop playing the opening, like you'll still have the understanding of the structures. I don't know how much it'll help in the King's Indian exactly, but a lot of those ideas, they do transfer to different positions. If you're already feeling like an opening is not right for you, to me, it's probably better to just start right away. Just like, you're going to switch at some point, so you might as well just rip that Band-Aid off.
Yeah, this sounds very logical. I'm telling myself the same thing, so I hope I will convince myself. Let's talk a little bit about chess improvement for lower rated people, because most of my audience, obviously most of chess audience online is not rated to 2000 or more. They are rated around like 1000, maybe 1000 plus. So I know that you have different programs for different levels. Every 100 of points elo points, the program changes. But could you summarize maybe like group various levels of chess players in like subgroups, like for example under 1,000, from 1,000 to 1,500, something like that, and provide some top recommendations for chess improvement for them? Because many of my viewers and listeners would be happy to receive such recommendations.
Absolutely. So I tend to think of the groups in like 500 point ranges, like 0 to 500, 500 to 1,000, 1,000 to 1,500, and so on. And typically, I think in terms of like FIDE numbers, but it's all relative, and there are no FIDE ratings anymore under 1,400. So it's like all a little bit funny. But generally 0 to 500 FIDE for me, it's going to be a little bit higher chess.com, and then a little bit higher lead chess. So people, they can just kind of estimate, where to place themselves. So at the lowest level, 0 to 500, I think a lot of it is just about getting like board awareness, understanding like what's going on the board, what's hanging, what the current material count is. Just basically trying to follow like the basic principles of chess. So you have like the basic opening principles, you have basic middle game and end game principles as well. Learning how to checkmate with a king and queen, I would say, is about where you want to be at with up to 500. So that also means knowing how to checkmate with two queens, or with two rooks as well, or king and queen. Like knowing at least king and queen, I think that's where you need to go. 500 to 1,000, a lot of the same things. They're going to be, I think, a little bit more adept at seeing pieces and seeing like what's hanging. And I think actually there's a lot of misconceptions out there. For players like myself, I've been a tournament player my whole life. It's been a long time since I was like under 1,000. I think for me and like a lot of grandmasters, like we barely remember what it's like to be at that level. And for many players, it takes them years to get to like even like 1,000 online or 1,200 or what have you. And it's like really can be a struggle. So it's not just like some people, they like to say like, okay, just stop hanging your pieces and you'll get to 1,500. And I think it's really not, it's not that simple for most people out there. Well, anyway, so basic tactics, of course, is still super important for the 500 to 1,000 range. I would say a huge thing that we see in the program for most of the lower rated players, I would say, is the simple question of how much time they spend per move. So when you play a classical game, if you blitz out all your moves, then they're likely not going to be of very high quality. But if you learn how to actually use your time, like spending a few minutes per move, especially after the opponent moves, looking for loose pieces, hanging tactics, threats, things of this nature, if you actually start spending your time, I think you start cleaning up in terms of the points. And that's, I think, far and away the number one. I look at a lot of students that are like in this range. We look at their profiles, we look at their games. And a lot of times what I see is like people are playing like correct openings. They're taking the center, e4, d4, knight f3, knight c3. They're like playing well. But at a certain point, like their opponent threatens mate, and they spend 20 seconds in a position where they have 35 minutes, and they push a pawn on the queen side and they just hang the mate. It's like those kinds of mistakes that it's just like, okay, of course that's going to hold you back, even if you're playing well. So in many cases, it's just like learning how to spend more time just looking at the position, evaluating threats, and of course not missing, one movers, two move tactics and things like that. Going on 1,000 to 1,500. I think this is the point where it starts to be useful to at least start to think about what openings you're playing. Up until this point, I think it's just like follow opening principles, take the center, develop your pieces, and focus just on spending your time looking for tactics and things like that. 1,000 to 1,500, this is where we start to recommend books in the program, like the Chernev books, like Logical Chess, Move by Move, instructive games, most instructive games ever played. Books that start to discuss a little bit about like middle game strategy and planning and like things like that. I think this is the level where it typically makes sense to learn these things. Of course, tactics, I mean, they're going to be important through and through. As the level goes up, the tactics have to go up. The calculation level, of course, has to improve as well. And this is where you also start to learn some basic, more basic endgames also. I would say for 500 to 1,000, we have some very, very basic like king and pawn endgames. Then from 1,000 to 1,500, we've got slightly more challenging king and pawn endgames, but still very like fundamental stuff. Mm-hmm. And then I think around 14 to 1,500 is where we have like the classic like Philidor position, Lucina position, rook endgames, which for me I think are super important. Because it's like those are like, I don't know, 50 to 90% of rook endgames like will come down to like Philidor or Lucina, I think for the most part. So knowing those, I think is super, super important. And then you're kind of like, if you at least know those two, I think you're okay for a while. You don't have to.
You're already better than many players. I've recently played in an OCB tournament, and I was playing at 2,000, and he didn't know the Philidor position. So I was very surprised. So sometimes even this happens.
Yeah, absolutely. And some people say like, no, like you don't need to know theoretical endgames, and I don't know, you can argue about that, but I think. The Philidor is definitely one where I've saved many games in tournaments. So I don't know. Mm-hmm. I've had it many times, or a position that could have reached the Philidor position, and I was very happy that I would have been comfortable holding it. No issues. Then from 1,500 to 2,000, I would say this is where, in terms of the calculation from 1,000 to 1,500. I think this is where you start to have to be able to solve some combinations, like 2-3 moves, sometimes 4 moves. Combination meaning multiple tactical ideas. Up until then, just like basic tactics, single tactical idea is I think enough. After this level, 1,500 to 2,000, when it comes to calculation, you got to learn how to solve more complicated combinations, 4, 5, 6 moves, different variations. Actually, I'll mention one thing. We recently released our own version of like the tactics trainer, because we had some issues. All the normal tactics trainers, right? It's just like you have a puzzle position, you insert one move at a time, they give you the opponent's response. It's usually not even like the critical response, is just some kind of computer move, and then you have to just continue from there. So we developed a test mainly for higher rated players. We'll probably adapt it for everyone, where you get a position and then it's up to you to just input all of the variations yourself in like the analysis. So, if you have to calculate some combination, but then you have to insert all the lines yourself, nothing is kind of given to you. And then you have like 10 of these problems and you have to spend your time accordingly, get in like an hour, for example, and then you got to figure out your way around all the problems. So that's something that we feel like is much more important when you're getting to this level, exactly like 1,500 to 2,000, like really approaching a higher level. So you have to learn how to like think deeply and calculate and analyze very concretely. There's lots of books we're suggesting at this level. I think this is also where we start to suggest a lot of game collections. Like one book we have is like Alekine's New York 1924 is suggested at this level. I think we also suggest Tall somewhere in this range, like 1,800, 1,900. Yeah, there's a lot of books in the program. As you go up in the level, like the amount of work you have to do starts to go up. So like lower levels, you got to read like 1 or 2 books. Higher levels, it's like 3, 4, 5 books. You have to like play more positions, study more end games, and so on.
Mm-hmm. I would like to use this podcast also as an opportunity to get advice about myself.
Absolutely, of course.
I'm currently on my journey to the FIDE Master title. Long story short, I used to play when I was a junior, and I had some good results. I obtained a candidate master title, but it's not a FIDE candidate master, it's a Russian candidate master. I used to live in Russia back then. Mm-hmm. So I had some results on the junior level, but then I gave up chess for 15 years, and I've now come back. And I'm rated FIDE around 1900. And chess.com's Blitz Rapid 2200 plus. Rapid something like 2250, I think. So obviously from 1900 to 23, 100 is a very long way to go. I understand that it will not be immediate; it will be a long journey. But I'm prepared to embark on it. And I want some advice from you, from your experience as a coach who has seen many of such cases. Probably, what is the best area to pay attention to? Some non-obvious things to work on at this level. Stuff like this.
Yeah, absolutely. So, it's definitely a long journey. We recently did a podcast about like adult players and how much they can improve at higher ages, because the problem I think is usually from a time and a lifestyle perspective. Like you're working, you have family, you don't have a lot of time to study chess. You don't have a lot of time to play chess. A big part of like getting better is like going to tournaments, playing like very serious games against strong players, learning from those games, and that's very time consuming, especially if you have to travel. So that's, I think, like the big challenges for adult players, in my opinion. When it comes to improving your skill level, I think you have a leg up because you played a lot as a kid. In my opinion, I feel like that it kind of gives you more like potential, like your connections run deeper than someone who's maybe newer to the game. That could be completely wrong. I don't know. That's just my gut instinct. So you can do it that way you will. But of course, it is important, I think, to believe that you can get better. I think that's a key part of everything. And then, when it comes to actually improving your skills, what I typically do with my students, of course, we start by looking at the games, and I try to figure out like what is one's weakness, because generally people will have some pretty clear weaknesses, or maybe they have a strength and then the other part of their game is not as good. And to really simplify things, usually there's someone who's better at tactics or they're better at positional chess, and they tend to prefer one or the other. And then like once you kind of figure that out, then it becomes simple, like what you need to work on. So for many students that I've had, for them, of course, their struggle was, tactics and calculation. And for them to make progress, I think it's not easy, but like they got to do a lot of solving and a lot of calculation work. Actually, one great example in the US was a friend of mine here in St. Louis, FIDE master Doug Eckert. And his rating, I think, was oscillating, I think, somewhere between 2,200 for 2,300, maybe for several years. And I know he was working very hard. He was following the Agar Chess School, the Killer Chess Training, doing their homework, solving lots of like difficult calculation puzzles like every week. And then, recently, the last couple of years, like he had a huge resurgence. He started performing extremely well in tournaments and playing really well and playing really sharp, like having nice. So it clearly paid off. But I imagine it was months and months and months, of hard work. But it did pay off for him. I've had other students who, despite being older, calculation wasn't their weakness. I remember one student in particular, his weakness was technique, and he just wasn't able to win a position without trying to do something tactically. He was always trying to like tactically win the position rather than just trading everything down to the end game and converting. And once, we looked at multiple examples and he kind of adjusted his mindset, he quickly shot up a little bit because he, that change, everything still stayed the same. He was a very good dynamic player. Now he realizes, he doesn't have to go crazy trying to win the game. He can just convert it smoothly. And then that was a big change for him. So of course a lot has to do, I think, with the individual player. So where would you place yourself in in these camps?
So I'm quite tactical. I have a puzzle rating of almost 3,600 on chess.com. So oof. I calculate better than I understand the position, so to say. And my coach, Grandmaster Farukh Amanatov, he lives in Dubai. We speak over Zoom once a week. He told me that yes, he considers positional play my weak point and also endgames. But I've started working on them and now feel a little bit more confident in endgames. But still, it's not my forte.
Okay, well, great. So, one thing I would suggest especially when it comes to like working on positional chess. I mean, there's a couple of classic things like looking at master level games. You know, the classic players are like Capablanca, Rubinstein, Botvinnik, Karpov, Carlsen, Kramnik. Like all these guys just have tremendous like positional games. And you know, if you have time, just playing through their games on a board, like OTB, maybe some of their annotated games, I think super useful. I certainly learned a lot, for instance, from like Kramnik's book. He had a My Life in Games book with some very nice annotations. Botvinnik as well, like 100 Selected Games, I think is a brilliant book. The other thing that I think is very useful to do is to spar some positions. So you take some classic positions where one side maybe has some advantage, like good knight versus bad bishop, or take some endgame where someone is better. You play it against a training partner, and you can play both sides of it where you're both trying to, let's say, convert the stronger side of the position, and seeing how that goes, and then analyzing the games after. I think for me, those two are kind of like, at least for me, that's what I've gained the most from when it comes to like, trying to improve that side of the game. And for endgames as well, like endgame sparring, like playing thematic endgames against someone, not a lot of time on the clock, then analyzing the game, trying to understand your decisions. I think that can definitely help a lot.
Yeah, thanks for the advice. I'll definitely try and implement those recommendations. Also, I wanted to speak a little bit about chess psychology. I know it's an important factor for all players. Some players struggle with it, and this limits their potential in chess. You've spoken on some podcast interviews that you've gotten better with it over time, gotten more confident. How would you recommend working on chess psychology?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say, okay, in general, it's something that does improve with experience. So many players, actually, especially post-pandemic, have just never played an OTB tournament, and they do show up not really knowing what to expect, and it can be very different, and they're not used to it. And even just things like writing down their moves and hitting the clock, and it's just they haven't been playing tournaments their whole lives, so they don't really know what it's like. So when it comes to like nerves and things of this nature, I definitely think experience is super helpful. The more you play over the board chess, the more you'll get used to it. So I always recommend to people before they play their first tournament to try to play some games in tournament conditions with a friend. You're using a clock, you're both writing your moves down. There are no distractions or like music playing or anything like that. It's just like as serious as you can make it. And so you kind of know what the real thing is like. Yeah, I would say when it comes to nerves, that's definitely something that's maybe not talked about as much as it could, because I think so many games are decided in tournaments from nerves and just like time pressure and one player just being more focused than the other. One thing that's helped me is just focusing on my breathing, which is just a very specific tip. But I found that I used to get very nervous when my opponent is in time trouble, because they get nervous and then the energy kind of transfers to me, and they have like 15 seconds and I have 3-4 minutes, and I have time to calculate, but I feel rushed and angsty, and everything starts to feel fuzzy. So in those moments, I found if I just start like just focusing on my breath, like deep breaths in and out, then I tend to calm down. I start seeing the position again, and I can just like start to calculate normally and take my time. And then, so that's something I try to do also when I'm in like heavy time pressure. I mean, if I'm playing on 30-second increment, it's never stress free, but like try to breathe, like control your thoughts. I hope that helps. I mean, there's lots and lots to talk about when it comes to chess psychology. I think in general, people are also quite hard on themselves, like especially after games or bad results or bad losses. I think people are very, very difficult and on themselves, and that might not be the best thing. So that's definitely something we can go into if you're interested.
Yeah, that's really interesting. We can go into this a little bit more. I also recommend. I was reminded when you spoke about all this. I recommend the podcast episode of mine with Livon Aronian on this channel. He gave some great tips. For example, he imagines himself on a beach to relax before an important game in some comfortable setting. I really like some of his tips. He's a bit like I would even say esoteric, but in a good way. So yeah, you wanted to add something about the psychology, right?
Yeah, so I would say there's one aspect of chess psychology, like during the game, like maintaining your composure and keeping your level when the game does get tense. But I think there's also aspects of chess psychology off the board, like when you're working on your chess, when you're thinking about your tournaments, reflecting on your games. And I think that part might be even more important, because I definitely see a lot of people online kind of, in my opinion, getting it wrong, or like being focused on the wrong things. Yeah, long story short, I think folks should try to realize that like chess improvement is a very long-term process, and so things rarely happen overnight. And so like if you have like a bad tournament or something, you have a bad game, you have a bad result, like it's not the end of the world. It doesn't mean like everything you've been doing is like a waste, or like the books you've been reading are like bad. Like it just means like, your performance can vary from tournament to tournament. But as long as like you keep working on your chess consistently, you keep like building good chess habits, like eventually like you kind of need to have faith that the improvement will come. But people don't have this faith, and I think that's why people often end up switching. Like they start one book, and then they take 2 weeks and they switch to something else, and they start like this new program, and it's like this new thing, and like this new course, and it's like, and then nothing really sticks because they don't really stick with it long enough. From what I can tell, yeah, just kind of like putting your head down and just like believing in the process, and like enjoying just the aspect of like going through chess games and like analyzing chess positions, and just kind of enjoying the journey, I think is where I would try to direct people, versus worrying too much about like, what's the best opening, and like what do I need to do, all this stuff like that people they often get hung up on.
Yeah, enjoying the process is very important. And what are your personal life hacks? If you lose a painful game or do badly in a tournament, how do you recover psychologically?
Yeah, actually, I think I'm pretty good when it comes to this, like not getting too angry. But generally, number one, I feel like it's never your last tournament. So if you lose a game or you have a bad event, right, it's just something you can learn from. For the future, and whatever happens, like there's always something you can learn from, and so it just means like there's things that you can do to improve. And so yeah, I try to focus on that being kind of like the takeaway. Usually when I go into a tournament, my main goal is to just play interesting games, and games that I can learn from later. So I try to play like principled chess. I try to like spend my time and make the best moves that I can. And then afterwards, like I'm going to analyze the game and see where I went wrong. And that'll be interesting for me. And if my opponent beats me, it's kind of interesting. Like, where do they outplay me? Like, what do they understand better than I do? Or maybe they just outcalculated me, which happens a lot. And it's like, okay, I got to get good. That's the takeaway. But, yeah, of course, like there are frustrating moments for me, maybe for others as well. I think the worst is when you have a winning position and you mess it up, and you either draw or you lose the game. That's probably the worst feeling in chess, is that roller coaster going from a win to a loss. And sometimes you lose just to a very like dumb blunder, and it's just like there's nothing you can learn from it. It's just like not to blunder. It's not exactly a lesson, but it's just happened. Like you lost focus. It was a long tournament, and just in that last second, it didn't go your way. I don't know. I try to be grateful. I try to think about how lucky I am. I get to play chess, and how much I enjoy the game, how I found my passion, how I get to make a living from pursuing my passion. And I think when you think about things in that perspective, you think about everything else that's going on in the world. I remember, I think actually it was maybe Kramnik wrote in that book, if I remember correctly, about how he would think about chess stuff, he would get depressed about his rating or whatever, and then he would watch the news for 5 minutes, and suddenly his depression would go away. He would realize there's worse things going on than losing a chess game. And I think maybe that's that's definitely something as you get older, like I don't know, kind of makes it easier to not take it so hard.
Thank you for this insights. Really great, great mentality. I think we should all adopt this kind of way of thinking. As a tradition, at the end of my podcasts, I invite my guests to play with me a Blitz game. Are you up for it?
Absolutely. Yeah, of course.
Okay, so usually grandmasters give me time odds to make it a little bit more interesting for them. What do you think would be? You're not a grandmaster, but you are still much stronger than me, and I am. So, what do you think would be in the optimal time control?
You said you're like 2200 chess.com Blitz around there?
Yeah, around 2200. Yeah.
I'm somewhere in like 2600 range. Don't have a mouse. I'm on my trackpad, so that slows me down. It slows me down a little
I'm
bit.
also on my trackpad, by the way.
Oh, okay.
Because my
So
mouse is broken.
we're even on that front. So that's good. So do you want to play with increment, or do you like playing without increment?
Whatever is more comfortable for you.
Either way is fine. I mean, more increment is usually safer, but
if we play on a trackpad, we can have 1 second increment for it to not go into.
How about maybe we can try 5 versus 2? Is that all right? 5.
Okay.
5-2.
Yeah. Okay.
1 second.
Okay. I don't know how many seconds that was already. Okay, let me make a move. Okay.
Oh. Yeah, I don't know if it went through.
You should make a move also.
As well. Oh, there we go.
So a minute. Yeah. Thank you. Okay, let's go.
All right.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay. Mhm. Okay. Did something stupid. Okay. At the end, you tricked me.
Oh man.
I already
No, I think
panicked in time travel.
yeah, you definitely had me that game, that's for sure.
I had a winning position, I think, yeah.
Yeah.
Let's take a look at this. Somehow you untangled at the right moment.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
I thought you played it very well. I think somewhere maybe bishop e2, maybe you let me off the hook there.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Maybe if you go
Bishop
h3,
e2.
I might have no moves because I wanted to play bishop g4.
Yeah. I was trying to prevent your counterplay. And I forgot about this. Yeah, h3. c6, the computer says, in this position is also fine. I was calculating it. But,
yeah, c6 might just be winning. Yeah. They're just breaking through.
I somehow didn't find the win after taking the knight, bishop d4, but I forgot about c7. Oh, c7 is a great resource here. So I don't take back after bishop takes bishop d4. I go c7 and win. I should have gone with my gut instinct. I wanted to go c6. Well, thanks for the game. It was fun.
Of course. Absolutely.
So thank you again for your insights and recommendations. I'm sure they will be useful for my viewers and listeners, and also for myself as this game. I'll take a look at it without a computer, as you recommend. Thank you very much. This was Kostya Kavutskiy. All the links to Kostya and his projects will be in the description. Follow him, and thank you very much. Subscribe to my channel if you like this podcast. Drop a comment if you liked it.
Thank you, Greg. Actually, I just want to say very much appreciate you having me on. It's definitely a blast. And thanks for what you do.
Goodbye, everyone.